My name is Jessica, and I want to share my story about adjusting to a new stepdad. Because if you've ever been in a blended family, you know that it can feel confusing, overwhelming, and sometimes even impossible at first. And I remember the day my mom told me she was getting remarried like it was yesterday. And I felt a storm of emotions all at once: shock, disbelief, excitement, curiosity, but mostly fear because I didn't know how my life would change. And I didn't know what to expect from this new person who would now be part of our family. And at first, I felt a mix of skepticism and hesitation because I was used to life with just my mom and me, with routines, boundaries, and a sense of stability. And suddenly everything seemed uncertain: my room, my schedule, my personal space. And the way I had always interacted with my mom felt slightly different, as if I were entering a new world, a world that included someone I didn't know, someone whose role and influence on my life I couldn't yet predict. And I remember feeling a little resistant, thinking about all the ways this could go wrong, and wondering whether I would ever feel comfortable, safe, or understood with this new person in my home. And those first few days were the hardest because I didn't know how to act around him. And I often found myself retreating into my room, avoiding interactions and sticking to my own routines because it felt like the only way to preserve some sense of control and normalcy. And my stepdad, on the other hand, tried to reach out gently, in small ways, asking me about school, my hobbies, my favorite subjects, or how my day had gone, and I would give short, one-word answers or polite nods, sometimes walking away because I wasn't ready to open up. And even when he tried to include me in small conversations, like asking if I wanted to watch a movie together or help plan a weekend project, I felt unsure, hesitant, and sometimes suspicious, questioning his intentions and whether he really cared about connecting with me or was simply trying to assert authority. And during this time, I noticed all the little things about him: how he would remember small details about my life, or offer to help when I seemed stressed or frustrated, or even his tone when he spoke, which was usually patient and kind. And I found myself noticing gestures, like him bringing my favorite snack from the store or casually asking if I wanted to help cook dinner. And at first I resisted, thinking that these gestures were too forward or that I wasn't ready to reciprocate. But slowly, the repetition and sincerity of his actions began to break down my walls. And I realized that these activities weren't about controlling me or imposing rules. They were opportunities to connect, to bond, and to build trust. And I remember the first time I actually agreed to help him with a weekend project, like fixing a broken shelf in the kitchen or planting flowers in the garden. And I was nervous, unsure if I could work with him without feeling awkward. And as we dug, planted, painted, or organized, I had to communicate, explain my ideas, negotiate, and even disagree respectfully. And in doing so, I realized that I was practicing real communication, real English, expressing preferences, asking questions, making suggestions, and responding to instructions. And all of these interactions, while about simple household tasks, became a training ground for developing confidence, clarity, and fluency, because I had to articulate my thoughts in a way that made sense and was understood. And I noticed that over time, I began to speak more freely, ask for help when needed, offer my own suggestions, and even tell stories about my day or share opinions, which felt empowering. And I began to see that the initial awkwardness wasn't permanent, that relationships could grow slowly and naturally with consistent effort and genuine interest. And as I engaged more, I noticed subtle shifts in our relationship, like him acknowledging my ideas, valuing my contributions, and genuinely listening, which encouraged me to continue participating, even in activities that initially felt uncomfortable. And I also realized that this process was teaching me more than just family dynamics. It was teaching me patience, empathy, negotiation, and conflict resolution. Because sometimes we disagreed about how to do things, like which color to paint a wall, which flowers to plant, or how to organize a room. And in those moments, I had to explain my perspective clearly, listen to his reasoning, compromise, and find solutions that worked for both of us. And every small victory, like successfully completing a task together or laughing over a shared mistake, strengthened our bond. And these victories were meaningful because they created trust and familiarity, which are the foundation of any healthy relationship. And over time, the initial tension and uncertainty transformed into comfort, warmth, and connection because I had learned how to communicate effectively, express my needs politely, and engage in collaborative activities. And these same skills transferred naturally to my English practice because every interaction required clear expression, listening, responding appropriately, and using the right tone. And I started noticing that my vocabulary expanded, my confidence in forming sentences improved, and I could express my feelings more naturally, all through authentic daily interactions, not just studying from a book. And the household tasks became mini lessons in language, collaboration, and problem solving, where I learned family vocabulary, polite phrasing, asking for help, giving instructions, explaining ideas, and negotiating responsibilities. And I realized that real-life English practice was far more effective than memorization because every word, sentence, and conversation had immediate meaning and purpose. And as days turned into weeks and weeks into months, I found myself looking forward to spending time with my stepdad, whether cooking, gardening, fixing something, or simply talking, because I had discovered that these moments were opportunities to grow, connect, and communicate. And the initial fear, resistance, and awkwardness gradually faded, replaced by trust, respect, understanding, and even affection. And I began to feel like I belonged in a blended family, that I could have a voice, make decisions, express myself, and contribute meaningfully. And as I narrate these experiences now, I can see how adjusting to a stepdad involved layered learning, learning about another person's needs, perspectives, and feelings, learning to communicate effectively and respectfully, learning to collaborate, negotiate, and compromise, and learning to navigate a complex emotional environment. And at the same time, all of these interactions were naturally reinforcing my English language skills because I had to choose words carefully, explain myself clearly, practice pronunciation, and structure sentences logically. And through this immersive, practical, and meaningful engagement, my confidence, fluency, and emotional intelligence all improved simultaneously. And by the time I could reflect on this journey, I realized that what started as fear and hesitation had transformed into a rich, engaging, and supportive relationship, full of mutual respect, understanding, and open communication. And this process taught me that language and life skills develop best in context, through real interactions, authentic challenges, and meaningful connections, and that adjusting to a new stepdad was not just about accepting change, it was about embracing growth, learning to communicate, developing empathy, building trust, and practicing English naturally in a safe, supportive environment. And all of these lessons laid the foundation for continued improvement in school, friendships, social interactions, and future challenges. Because I had developed a mindset, skill set, and confidence that could be applied in any situation. And reflecting on this, I understand that patience, persistence, practice, and authentic engagement are the keys to both personal and language growth. And the transformation from awkward, hesitant communication to confident, natural expression shows that every small interaction, every shared activity, and every polite, thoughtful conversation contributes cumulatively to meaningful progress, not only in relationships, but in English fluency. And this realization inspires me to continue practicing, engaging, and growing every day. Because growth is continuous, and every step, every word, every sentence is part of a larger journey, and the journey I experience with my stepdad is proof that blending families, building relationships, and improving communication, both emotionally and linguistically, is entirely possible when approached with openness, patience, and consistent effort. And every challenge can be transformed into an opportunity for learning, connection, and self-improvement. And through this journey, I learned that authentic communication, empathy, and engagement are far more valuable than perfection, because fluency, trust, and emotional intelligence are built through practice, reflection, and meaningful interaction. And this is exactly how I grew from a hesitant, uncertain teenager to a confident, communicative, and emotionally aware young woman, able to express herself clearly, participate actively in relationships, and navigate complex situations with patience, understanding, and natural fluency. And these lessons continue to guide me every day in language, life, and relationships. As we continued living together, I started to realize that weekend projects weren't just chores or tasks to get done. They became the heartbeat of our relationship. Moments where connection, communication, and learning all intertwined naturally. And I remember the first weekend we decided to repaint the living room together. And I was skeptical at first, unsure if I would enjoy it or even know how to contribute meaningfully. But he approached me with patience and encouragement, breaking the tasks into small steps, explaining the process, asking for my opinion about colors, and even making it fun by turning it into a small challenge to see who could paint the straightest lines or organize the furniture most efficiently. And at first I hesitated, overthinking every movement, worried that I might make mistakes, but slowly I found myself participating more, suggesting ideas, asking questions about the best techniques, and sharing thoughts about furniture placement. And this simple activity became a natural exercise in conversation, vocabulary, and emotional expression, because I had to explain preferences, give polite suggestions, negotiate differences, and respond thoughtfully to feedback. And while painting a wall might sound trivial, for me it was a profound learning experience, because I realized that every shared activity, no matter how small, was an opportunity to practice communication, to articulate ideas clearly, and to build trust through collaboration. And as weekends passed, we moved on to other projects, like cooking meals together where I had to follow instructions carefully, ask for clarification when I didn't understand a recipe, suggest substitutions, and explain why I preferred certain ingredients or flavors. And even the mistakes, like spilling a bit of sauce or mismeasuring an ingredient, became moments of shared laughter, learning, and dialogue. And I noticed that as we cooked, I naturally expanded my vocabulary, learning words related to kitchen tools, cooking techniques, flavors, and measurements. And I also started to practice polite requests, explanations, and sequencing words like first, then next, and finally, because these were necessary to communicate effectively in the flow of cooking together. And it was amazing to notice that language practice didn't feel forced. It was embedded in real life, in activities that had purpose and meaning, and as I engaged more, I began noticing subtle improvements in my pronunciation, sentence structure, and ability to explain thoughts clearly, because I was communicating in real time, responding to instructions, negotiating preferences, and describing actions. And beyond cooking and painting, we tackled projects like assembling furniture, where I had to carefully read instructions, interpret diagrams, ask clarifying questions, and explain my reasoning for placing pieces a certain way. And these activities were challenging, requiring patience, careful listening, clear expression, and teamwork. And every successful completion of a project brought a sense of achievement, strengthened our bond, and boosted my confidence in both communication and problem solving. And I started noticing that my ability to collaborate at home carried over to school, because I could now speak more confidently in group projects, explain my ideas, listen to classmates, and contribute meaningfully without hesitation. And the skills I was developing at home, polite phrasing, negotiation, expressing opinions, asking questions, active listening became powerful tools for social interaction. And I found myself narrating experiences more fluently to friends, explaining decisions, telling stories, and even joking naturally, because the foundation built during our weekend projects provided practical experience and authentic communication. And I began to understand that adjusting to a stepdad involved not just emotional adaptation, but also language practice and context, because every conversation required clarity, attention, empathy, and responsiveness. And through this, I learned the subtle art of balancing confidence with politeness, assertiveness with respect, and expression with listening. And over time, I also started noticing that I could handle disagreements gracefully, whether it was about which paint color to choose, which recipe to follow, or which piece of furniture to assemble first. And each negotiation, explanation, or compromise became a lesson in articulating ideas. Practicing vocabulary and applying language in real life. And these experiences were further enriched when I started adding reflection moments at the end of each weekend, discussing what we had accomplished, how we felt about the tasks, what went well, what could be improved. And these discussions required descriptive language, sequencing words, expressing emotions, and explaining reasoning, all of which naturally strengthened my spoken English. And this process extended beyond the home into school, because I could now participate actively in class discussions, collaborate with classmates, and share ideas clearly. And in friendships, I became more confident in explaining experiences, recounting weekend stories, and negotiating plans. And I even found that storytelling, humor, and casual explanations became easier, because I had practiced communicating about real life events and meaningful context at home. And through months of consistent participation in these weekend projects, I realized that I had gained not only a stronger bond with my stepdad, but also practical language skills, emotional intelligence, and social confidence in each task. Whether big or small, painting, cooking, gardening, or assembling became a natural lesson in vocabulary, grammar, pronunciation, polite expression, active listening, and empathy. And I could see myself improving gradually, steadily, and consistently because real communication, shared experiences, and meaningful interaction are far more effective for learning than passive study. And this understanding encouraged me to continue engaging fully, to embrace challenges, practice patience, and enjoy the process. Because growth in language and relationships happens gradually, cumulatively, and through authentic, immersive experiences. And as I narrate this story now, I realize that my weekend projects, initially mundane and awkward, became the foundation for my confidence, fluency, and ability to communicate clearly and empathetically. And they showed me that practical engagement is the most effective way to learn both language and life skills. And by investing effort, attention, and care in each activity, I not only strengthened my bond with my stepdad, but also transformed myself into a more articulate, confident, empathetic, and fluent communicator. And these lessons continue to guide me in all areas of life, showing that consistent, immersive practice combined with emotional engagement is the secret to mastering English and building meaningful relationships simultaneously. And through this journey, I understood that small steps, daily practice, reflection, and authentic interaction are the keys to success, growth, and fluency, and that what once felt awkward, frustrating, or intimidating can become natural, enjoyable, and deeply rewarding when approached with patience, openness, and consistent effort. The growth I experienced at home translated into school and friendships because I was no longer afraid to speak, to ask questions, to participate, or to express my opinions. And in group projects, class discussions, and casual conversations with peers, I found that I could negotiate ideas, explain my thoughts, and articulate emotions clearly, which had been difficult before. And even in social situations where I needed to describe my blended family, explain routines, or discuss hobbies, I was able to choose words carefully, speak politely, and share stories naturally. And friends began noticing my confidence, fluency, and ability to express myself authentically, which encouraged me to practice even more. And through storytelling, sharing experiences, and participating in interactive discussions, I further strengthened vocabulary, pronunciation, and conversational skills. And these interactions reinforced lessons from home about empathy, active listening, and respectful communication, showing me that language fluency and emotional intelligence grow best together, because speaking effectively is not just about grammar or vocabulary, it's about understanding context, reading emotions, responding appropriately, and building connection. And this was exactly what I had learned while adjusting to a new stepdad. And it was now manifesting in every aspect of my life, from casual conversations to structured school interactions, and even in online communication, because consistent practice in real contexts ensures that English becomes natural, fluid, and confident, just as it had in my household. As I reflect on my journey now, I realize that adjusting to a new stepdad wasn't just about accepting someone new into the family, it was about personal growth, emotional development, and learning to communicate effectively. And every shared activity, conversation, and even disagreement became a lesson in expression, patience, empathy, and resilience. And through this process, I discovered that language learning is deeply intertwined with life experiences because every moment I communicated, whether asking politely for help with a chore, negotiating responsibilities during a weekend project, or explaining my perspective on a shared decision, I was practicing English naturally and meaningfully. And this practical application of language allowed me to internalize vocabulary, expressions, and sentence structures in a real context, which textbooks alone could never provide. And as I began to narrate stories about my day, describe tasks, and share feelings aloud with my stepdad, I not only built confidence in speaking, but I also learned to think in English, to organize my thoughts clearly, and to respond spontaneously. And this ability spilled over into school, friendships, and social situations because I could now express my ideas, opinions, and emotions fluently, politely, and authentically. And every mistake I made became an opportunity for improvement rather than a source of embarrassment. Because my stepdad created an environment where mistakes were normal, feedback was constructive, and communication was safe. And this encouraged me to take risks, try new phrases, experiment with vocabulary, and practice pronunciation, which accelerated my fluency tremendously. And over time, I noticed subtle but important changes. I could participate in conversations without hesitation, answer questions without overthinking, use idioms and expressions naturally, and narrate events with clarity and confidence. And this was mirrored in my schoolwork, group discussions, social interactions, and even casual chats with friends, because the confidence I gained at home transferred to all areas of my life. And I also began to recognize the importance of active listening, because understanding others is just as vital as expressing yourself. And I practiced asking clarifying questions, responding appropriately, showing empathy, and using polite language in every interaction, which not only improved my English but strengthened my relationships, deepened my emotional intelligence, and taught me to navigate social dynamics thoughtfully. And the culmination of all these experiences showed me that language learning is not a separate task. It's an integrated life skill built through real interactions, repeated practice, reflection, and emotional engagement. And I also learned advanced strategies that enhanced my progress, like storytelling, shadowing native speakers, recording and reviewing my own speech, and gradually expanding my vocabulary and context. And each day of practice, every dialogue, every story shared, every question asked, and every collaborative activity contributed to cumulative growth, so that by the time months had passed, I could speak confidently, express complex ideas clearly, narrate events smoothly, use descriptive language, convey emotions, and participate naturally in conversations. And all of this started from what seemed like a difficult, awkward, and uncomfortable adjustment period, proving that persistence, engagement, and reflection are far more important than innate talent. And I also realized that learning to communicate effectively with my stepdad had taught me life skills beyond language, like patience, empathy, compromise, negotiation. and perspective taking, which are essential for navigating relationships in any context. And combining these life lessons with active English practice created a powerful synergy. Because when you feel confident, understood, and supported emotionally, your language skills develop faster, fluency comes naturally, and communication becomes authentic and effortless. And now, reflecting on my transformation, I can see that what once felt intimidating, confusing, and overwhelming has become manageable, rewarding, and even enjoyable because I built confidence step by step, word by word, conversation by conversation, mistake by mistake. And every small achievement reinforced my motivation to keep practicing, keep learning, and keep connecting with others. And this journey taught me that language learning and emotional growth go hand in hand. Because the ability to express yourself clearly, listen actively, and engage authentically in relationships is the essence of both human connection and communication. And by embracing this perspective, I was able to not only adjust to my new stepdad, but thrive in my blended family, strengthen bonds, express myself fluently, and ultimately turn a challenging life transition into an opportunity for personal development, language mastery, and lasting confidence. And the lesson I want to share with you is that no matter the situation, no matter how awkward or difficult it seems at first, consistent practice, patience, empathy, and a willingness to engage will transform both your relationships and your communication skills. Because fluency, confidence, and meaningful connection are built through intentional, sustained effort. And if you take these principles, apply them in your own life, practice regularly, reflect on your progress, embrace mistakes, and engage in real conversations, you too can experience the same kind of growth, improvement, and confidence that I did. And your journey, like mine, can start today with small steps, consistent practice, emotional engagement, and an open mind, because the transformation is not hypothetical, it is achievable, practical, and real. And I can promise you that if you commit to it, your English success story and your ability to navigate new relationships confidently are waiting for you, ready to unfold, just like mine did.